It's quite normal when we start to meditate for the mind to jump around all over the place. We might find it tends to chase after all the little things, to be constantly moving about, from the present to the past to the future, in fact to rarely be still at all. Fortunately, the mind can be tamed, not by forcing it to stop or trying to make it sit still. We don't want to trap it. That would just stir it up and create even more movement. But by training the mind, having an awareness of when our attention has wandered off, and gently bringing it back with a kind and friendly hand. In this way, the mind slowly becomes a little less restless. It also becomes more comfortable with this idea of sitting still. In fact, it might even come to enjoy it. This analogy for the mind has been around for thousands of years. Thankfully, so has the knowledge that, with time and practice, we can learn to train this monkey. Have you ever wondered why, when you chase after happiness, it seems so elusive? I think most of us do it, most of the time. There's an idea that happiness exists somewhere else. Not in this moment, maybe in another place, or it's with another person, just doing something different. When we chase after happiness as a movement, it's away from the present moment to another place, to some time other than now. And because we move away from the present moment, ironically, we move further away from happiness. Because when you think about it, happiness can only exist in this moment, right here, right now. Now, the interesting thing is that when we focus less on chasing our own happiness, and instead focus more on the happiness of others, we immediately find ourselves in the present moment. So not only are we benefiting others by having a more open, empathetic mind, but we're also benefiting ourselves by being more present and experiencing more happiness. So the quickest way, the surest way of experiencing more happiness in our lives is to focus more on the happiness of others. Confidence is a funny thing. People sometimes assume it's about repeating a story in the mind over and over again. One that makes us look or feel really good. But the problem is, when we have an artificial confidence like this, it's always tinged with fear. What happens if it lets us down? What happens if we lose the storyline? What happens if doubt creeps in, that feeling of, am I living the right way? But there's a kind of confidence, you could call it quiet confidence, that's almost the opposite. It means letting go of all that stuff, putting down the old storylines. And when we let go of it, we experience something else. We experience vulnerability, uncertainty, and openness. But within that, somewhere, we discover quiet confidence. Perhaps it's just a byproduct of being willing to exist without those comforting stories. But the incredible thing is, because it's not separate from ourselves, we can't lose it. It's indestructible, and that's the beauty of it. To rest with that sense of vulnerability, not necessarily knowing, but at the same time being confident in not knowing. That's quiet confidence. Learning to meditate is a little like learning to surf. In the same way that the ocean has many different moods, so does the mind. Sometimes it feels easy, even relaxing. At other times, it feels challenging, perhaps overwhelming. But as we spend more time in the water, or more time with the mind, we come to know these different conditions. We begin to better understand what kind of approach is required each day. Some days, we'll need to apply a little more effort to stay balanced. On others, we experience almost effortless practice, or at least moments of it anyway. And as we become more stable in our practice, more balanced in our approach, we begin to feel more confident. Most important of all, we come to accept that although we can't control the waves, we can always learn how to ride them. When we sit to meditate, it's very tempting to remember previous meditations. hoping that an enjoyable one will be repeated, or perhaps fearing that a more challenging one will reappear. The trouble is, these ideas, our hopes and our fears, can really get in the way of a direct experience of the breath, of this moment. Because rather than observing the mind as it is, allowing it to naturally unfold, we're busy trying to create an idea of what we would like it to look like instead. That's why it's helpful to approach meditation with what's known as beginner's mind. It means sitting down without any preconceptions or assumptions, with no idea of what we'll find or what the outcome will be. So it's a very innocent mind. It's a bit like the way young children interact with the world, with a sense of curiosity and wonder. And there's a certain amount of delight inherent in that interest in the world. Kids aren't thinking about the outcome necessarily. They simply enjoy exploring for its own sake. So with beginner's mind, we're going into each meditation, recognizing that the experience is new. The mind is different. The conditions are different. And so rather than comparing our current experience to our expectation, we're actually present, interested in the body and mind as it is in this moment. We're always taught the more effort we put in, the more we'll get out of life. But of course this isn't always true. Take falling asleep, for example. You can prepare in the right way, put yourself in the right position, and get yourself comfortable. But after that, well, you can't force it to happen, right? In fact, it works exactly the other way around. The harder you try, the less sleepy you become. It's only when we stop trying that we finally let go and drift off. And before we know it, we're waking up the next morning feeling refreshed, relaxed, after a good night's sleep. And it's a very similar story when we're training the mind. I think a nice metaphor for this is the idea of taming a wild horse. If you look at how a wild horse is tamed, rather than pinning it down in one place, the horse is led out on a very long rope and put in a big open spacious field. The horse runs around feeling like it's got all the space in the world. But very slowly, the rope's pulled in, and the horse adjusts to this feeling until it comes to a natural place of rest. And we're looking to do just the same thing with the mind in meditation. Not trying to pin it down in one place, but bringing it to a natural place of rest. So let go of any idea of needing to achieve something or get somewhere, and instead enjoy the opportunity to sit back, relax, and be present in the world. Hi, and welcome to Headspace. So before you begin eating, just take a moment to consider where your food has come from, where it was grown, where it was prepared, maybe where it's traveled from. Just pausing, looking at the food, and then picking the food up, taking a moment to smell the food. So engaging the physical senses. As you smell the food, what does it remind you of? Does it take you to a particular place in your mind? And then putting it in the mouth. Not chewing it as quickly as possible, but just moving it around the mouth. Noticing the tastes, the flavors, savoring each and every moment.
So just lying down, we're going to focus the attention on the different parts of the body, watching as they switch off for the night, starting down at the feet, muscles in the toes and the arches switching off, the legs, any tension just dissolving as the calves and thighs power down. The muscles in the lower back and the stomach switching off. Now the chest and upper back switching off. The shoulders, the arms, the hands and fingers just switching off. The face, the eyes, the mouth, any tension just melting away as the muscles switch off, shut down, at rest for the night.
So perhaps you're fortunate enough to be sitting right next to that person you really care about right now. If not, if they're a little further away, just bringing that person to mind. And I'd like you to begin by taking a nice big deep breath, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. And as you breathe out through the mouth, just gently closing the eyes and allowing the breath to return to its natural rhythm. And I'd like you to imagine that every time the body breathes out, every time you exhale, you're just sharing a sense of happiness, of love, whatever you want to call it, with that other person. So just following each out breath, sense of sharing happiness with that other person. Still aware of the in-breath, following the out-breath. And when you imagine that person looking as happy as they possibly could, just gently opening the eyes. Have you ever wondered why we teach our kids about looking after the body, but we don't really teach them how to look after the mind? Teaching them about meditation at an early age would set them up for life. But we all know that sitting quietly isn't that easy. It's not easy for us as grown-ups, so think how hard it is for kids. They'd much rather be out and about, having fun, getting dirty, than sitting still with their eyes closed for 10 minutes. So here at Headspace, we've created some activities and meditations, especially for them, with themes like calm, kindness, and even bedtime. We created these sessions for children and parents to enjoy together. Each activity is different depending on how old your child is. There are exercises designed for toddlers, preteens, and every age in between. This really is the best of both worlds. Quality time with your child while teaching them a valuable skill for life. And hey, who knows? Maybe you'll even get a little extra headspace for yourself. So impatience can arise. In fact, it will almost inevitably arise in your Headspace session at some stage or another. It's not that you're doing anything wrong, and it's not that things are necessarily moving particularly slowly. It's just the nature of the mind to experience impatience sometimes. I know I talk about this in quite a few of the different guides, but it's worth saying it's not really about sort of developing more patience. It's more about letting go of impatience. Once we understand how that works and the role of impatience, then it becomes something really useful. And all of a sudden, it's no longer an obstacle. It's a reminder. It's a reminder to be present, to let go. So if we start from the place that patience is an innate quality of mine, so it's with us all the time. And we only tend to kind of notice the counterpoint. We tend not to notice so much when we're being patient. We tend to notice when we're impatient. So we don't need to try to be more patient. We simply have to be a little less impatient. And we can only do that when we see the mind clearly, when we see the way the mind is behaving. So during the session, doesn't matter what the impatience is about. The impatience might be, oh, come on, Andy, stop talking so much. Like, let's just get on with the practice. Or it might be, being impatient because we've got to, I don't know, go and do something in the house, or we need to kind of get out to work, whatever it might be. Or it might just be, a broader impatience, perhaps looking for what we perceive to be more progress in our practice. Whatever the impatience is, that is only a thought. We tend to think of impatience as something more as a thought, more than a thought, maybe even an emotion. Kind of, perhaps it sometimes has like a physical aspect as well. But impatience is really just a series of thoughts. We want life to be a certain way. Life is behaving in a slightly different way. So we have what we think life should be and what life is. And the difference between the two is normally equal to our level of impatience. Once we see that clearly, then we're able to let go of what we think life should be and instead be a little more comfortable where we are. So whether we call it a reduction in the amount of impatience or a greater amount of patience or a greater amount of acceptance, it's really just this idea of not chasing, grasping after something, instead letting go. And when we let go, we naturally feel a greater sense of patience in both the body and in the mind. And the knock-on effect outside of our practice, of course, is how that relates to those around us and to our relationships. Not only us being less impatient with those around us, but also giving people a little more slack. Having seen the impatience in our own mind, understanding kind of how that arises, why that arises, and knowing that when other people are kind of maybe a bit mean to us, they're not doing it because necessarily they want to be. It's just that that pattern of impatience has perhaps become a little too strong. It's overwhelmed them in some way. And so we can meet them from a place of understanding and empathy rather than sort of criticism or judgment.